Thank you, Ted. Thank you, Leslie. This year, LLMs bumped into a wall. And you can see here, these are all studies from 2025, significant performance drop-offs, even with chain of thought, which is a framework, a reasoning framework. Significant limitations in handling complex, multimodal, and multi-step reasoning tasks, even with advanced techniques like chain of thought, and a complete accuracy collapse beyond certain complexities. LLMs have limitations in exact computations. So the wall that AI has bumped into is really three things. One is a lack of connection to the physical world, to understand physical phenomenon and understand the environment in which human beings live and make decisions in. The second is novel situations. So when faced with novel situations, and of course in the real world, we face novel situations all of the time. And so it struggles with novel situations. And thirdly, it struggles with complexity. So this is really significant. And this has been something that we've been seeing coming for some time, but it's interesting to see now the studies bear this out. The talk about AGI and ASI has kind of faded from the scene over the last year. That was big 2 years ago and even a year ago. And so there's been a big focus kind of on the low-hanging fruit where artificial intelligence can create value for people. And Office obviously being well-positioned to add this AI assistant. Microsoft controls Excel, Microsoft controls PowerPoint, it controls Teams, controls all of those technologies. And also they made close to a $14 billion investment in OpenAI. So they have a huge influence over OpenAI as well. And it's bumped into some really serious problems with basic functions. So Microsoft has either pushed back the release or postponed indefinitely the release of features. For example, AI-generated PowerPoint presentations that are generated from Excel files. It's having trouble with something as basic as that. Analysis of Teams video calls and shared content, answering attendees' written questions, and generating summaries of meeting content. That's been postponed indefinitely. So the most basic implementations of AI are also struggling right now. There have been recent reports, and literally these have been in September. Equity analysts estimate that only 1% of over 430 million paying users of Office 365 have opted to spend the additional $30 per seat per month for AI 365 Copilot features. That's extraordinary. Only 1% after all of that marketing, all of that investment that has been done. Here you can see the portfolio managers. So you see the fund managers, Janice Henderson. What Microsoft really has to get right is the integration within the broader suite to show that Copilot can work across companies' data in an effective way. And then we go into the Microsoft ecosystem itself. SHI is one of Microsoft's biggest resellers. And they're saying the challenge for businesses is that there's this leap of faith moment where you try to justify it with a return on investment calculation, which is hard to figure out. That's just really tough to have their biggest resellers saying this to the media. And then you have, for example, advisory firms that advise Microsoft enterprise customers in their negotiations with Microsoft. And they speak to CIOs all of the time in these enterprises, and they're saying a lot of the CIOs I talk to still can't voice the use cases for Copilot that are getting them a return on their investment. That speaks volumes. And finally, Microsoft's cloud partners. That should be a layup for Microsoft, right? That should be an automatic, just politically, to take seats for Copilot. And Informatica is one of those cloud partners, tested 365 Copilot, but has passed on buying seats because they cannot quantify the return on investment to justify the doubling of the price of Office per seat from $30 to $60. So this has nothing to do with a promise of artificial intelligence. It's just the function of understanding where things actually stand when we kind of move the haze of a lot of the hype that you see around artificial intelligence today. And the same applies to AI agents. You've seen this kind of shift of discussion from AGI and ASI to agentic AI and AI agents. But the brain of AI agents, that's an LLM, all right? And so there's a real problem there. You hear some talk about small language models, but that has more to do with the cost of running AI. and offloading the simpler tasks to reduce the cost. What is the limitation here? And the limitation is really based on the fact that LLMs are language-centric and they're verbal reasoning-centric. We as human beings use all kinds of reasoning. We use sign reasoning. So we look for signals. We use comparative reasonings. We need comparatives, we need comparables to have some perspective on how big a problem this might be, how big a risk this might be, how big an opportunity this might be. Without comparables and without signals, we can't know these things. Causal reasoning, we have to have some understanding of cause and effect and the relationship between variables. And analogical reasoning, identifying similar events, conditions, and objects in the physical world. So we have to have that ability to see those similarities, and from there, we're able to kind of generate our anticipatory capabilities, forecasting capabilities, and take a course of action. So let's talk about the three missing pieces. What is the wall that AI has bumped into? So one is this physical connection, this direct link to the physical world and human decision making. The second is the ability to handle novel situations. If you have a connection with the physical world, you're always getting new data every second, every minute. And so that allows your models to train and learn and be prepared for changes in that physical environment much more dynamically. And third, complexity. There's an enormous amount of complexity, obviously, in the real, physical, natural world. So we have focused on something called anticipatory intelligence. It's observation-based. So we spent a lot of time connecting up the world, basically sensors, satellites, other types of observation-based equipment around the world. We pull hyper-localized data from every jurisdiction in the world. So we're going as close to the source as possible, as close as we can get. And we are focused on observing human activity, but natural phenomenon. And human activity we regard as a part of natural phenomenon as well. I mean, we come from this same place, and we are very much, our behavior is very predictable and falls into natural streams of data as well. And rather than just exclusively focused on verbal reasoning, we focus on other forms of reasoning, sensory, visual, and spatial. And more specifically, sign reasoning, comparative reasoning, causal reasoning, and analogical reasoning. And we'll get more specific on that now. This is one example of how the reasoning process works, but it's very dynamic. You can start from anywhere. But let's start from signals, because that makes complete sense, right? You want to get those signals first. You want to have information to work with. So the way this system works, essentially, is that if event signals, let's say, are less than 0.5, then the LDRM continues to look for information. So it continues to need more information. It continues to essentially request additional information. Once it exceeds a certain level, let's say in this case 0.5, then comparative reasoning is activated, and it's looking for comparables. And once a certain threshold is reached, causal reasoning is activated. So you find the comparables. You need comparables because comparables give you perspective. You can't compare, for example, a country like the United States and Iceland, because Iceland has 250,000 people. We have over 300 million people, right? You can't compare, say, the GDP of China to the GDP of the United States without adjusting it for population size. And if you adjust it for population size, you get a very different perspective on what the GDP per capita is. So comparables are critical. And the lack of appropriate comparables leads to a lot of misinformation and disinformation that people receive. Once the causation element is completed, there's a handoff to analogical reasoning. And that's really where the magic of forecasting begins. Because in analogical reasoning, you're looking for similarities and you're looking for certain patterns. And from there, you can generate the final step, verbal reasoning, just simply to articulate what the data says. So the verbal reasoning in this case is anchored in the data. And so therefore it cannot hallucinate. And hallucination is something living organisms do. Hallucination is a word really that means a very wrong answer. But it could go differently. Now let's assume you only have verbal signals to work with at first. So sign reasoning in that case would hand off to verbal, and verbal can play a role in the analysis process, not just articulating it. So verbal is used where it's appropriate. And sign reasoning, causal reasoning, comparative reasoning, and analogical reasoning are present throughout all living organisms on the planet. So it's critical. There's nothing, whenever you're solving a problem, you're always using all of those together. Then you wouldn't be able to survive with just verbal reasoning. It wouldn't be possible for you to do that. So therefore, how could we solve the world's problems exclusively with verbal reasoning? It's not possible. So where do verbal reasonings fit into our LDRMs? So our view is improving the currency of the data. How up to date is that data? The veracity of the data, how accurate is that information? And the more observation based it is, the more accurate it's going to be. It's more objective, it's more neutral. It's not going through filters of interpretation. Multimodality is critical. We haven't seen enough of that. So it's too much text. It's text heavy, but images, video, that's all important. But more important is live monitoring of the natural physical world. It's not a matter of just doing your analysis with digital content. That's removed, it's theoretical, and that's part of the problem. And then finally, reweighting verbal reasoning, not making it 95% or 99% of the reasoning process, but balancing it with the other forms of reasoning. We had two really big breakthroughs. One is innate curiosity, and the other is urgency drivers. So the system on its own will seek more information, just like we would when we need more information. If we feel we have inadequate information, what do? We go get more information. So that's triggered by have certain thresholds been reached. Urgency drivers, what are the risk thresholds? We have risk thresholds for events all over the world. So if those risk thresholds are exceeded, the urgency factor kicks in and it captures data. The system will capture data in rapid succession, just as if you were dealing with a crisis, you would seek and gather information at an extraordinary rate, okay? And that's how this system works. So from that standpoint, it shares some similarity with how living organisms would function, but I want to limit that because I don't think artificial intelligence should be necessarily emulating humans or even other living organisms. I think it's something that's here to augment our decision-making process. In addition to that, the system is able to generate candidate data source networks. Those are really, really important, and we'll talk more about that. I'll just visualize this for you. When thresholds are exceeded, the system will spin up 12 different candidates of data source networks, as you can see here on the screen. Each one of them is configured differently. So some might have more data sources, some might have less data sources, some might be more focused on a sector, some might be more cross-sector, some might be more localized in certain parts of the world, some might have a wider geographic range. And that is automatically tested on this first loop based on the currency of the data of each one of those 12 networks, the veracity of the data, and the depth of analysis and insights. And in a matter of seconds, certainly in a matter of minutes, it could be reduced from 12 to 3. Once it's reduced to 3, the final loop is accuracy of forecast. And the forecasting is done pretty quickly. So you're looking at remember, we're looking at movement of data in matters of minutes, in some instances in the matter of seconds. So from second to second, how are certain variables moving? Are they moving together? Are they moving in opposite directions? Are they unaffected by each other? So we're able to see all of that, and we can see the accuracy of the forecast. And so it comes down to the optimal candidate network. So we're looking at the currency score, right? Essentially assessing the recency and timeliness of data. Another big problem with LLMs is that they're focused on historical data. There's a cutoff. There's always a cutoff. And the analysis is based on a corpus of text with a cutoff date. The veracity of data. So that's evaluating the reliability of the sources and the data itself. Localization score. We have found that the more localized the information is, the more localized the signals are, the better and clearer picture we have of events that are happening in the world. The sector blend score. Generally, we have found in most cases, the more sectors that are represented, there's always signals. If you want to know why energy prices are going up or energy prices are going down, there's a myriad of variables that are affecting, that are geopolitical, that are economic. There's so many different variables, and you want that cross-sector blend. And multimodality, which is extremely important. Volume of data endpoints. Sometimes you can have too many data endpoints, and sometimes you can have too few. So those are all some of the critical elements that we're looking at. Okay, let's go to the reasoning methodology. So how is it reasoning? Well, it's looking at the common elements found across data maps of similar events. So either it's looking back at recent events that it deems similar based on the data that's present, or it's looking at the quick succession of cross-sector data maps that it's capturing in minutes and seconds. And so it's extracting from that the common elements. It's seeing what the common elements are across all the different layers. It's also eliminating the non-common elements, okay? And it's also eliminating the insignificant elements, the elements with values closest to 0. And you see some of the other steps that it's taking there. And then, of course, it goes into the more advanced reasoning processes. Here you can see the observation-driven inquiries. We have the dynamic event urgent response data sweeps. So these are literally sweeps that will kick in automatically based on the severity of the situation. Geoscans, we're doing those all the time. Sector scans. Time inflections, very important. The insertion of inflection points, for example, in relation to equities, digital assets, commodities, fixed assets, portfolios, corporate M&A, supply chain junctures, market events, all of the above. And then finally, the ability to customize all of this. So you can customize it for a specific project. Okay, so let's go through into 3 specific examples here. So here we're implementing really 2 things here, set theory and propositional logic in the system. So what connects and ties everything together is logic, and we have found that these data streams, literally data falls into these natural streams. So set theory was just ideal for our ability to organize that data across sectors. And so in this case, we're talking about the Ukraine-Russia peace agreement. And so we're looking at different scenarios. A peace agreement is signed, sanctions on Russia are lifted, reconstruction in Ukraine begins, international investors return to Ukraine, investor risk aversion decreases, and on and on. And so we see 3 scenarios. One is a full peace agreement signed, normalizing economic conditions. Another is limited peace agreement, economic uncertainty continues. And the third is peace talks fail. So in the last 2, there's still huge problems. So if you're Russian, for example, you still do not have access to foreign equities to invest, as an example. If you're Ukrainian, you're not jumping back into Ukrainian equities or even Ukrainian bonds until there's stability and until that big reinvestment comes. So being able to anticipate and predict these types of events and understanding when they're going to happen is critical. Those probabilities are dynamic. They change many times during the course of a day. So this is not a static picture. It's constantly moving. It's constantly changing. I'll give you a second scenario, which is the Armenia-Azerbaijan trip agreement. So this is a recent agreement between Armenia and Azerbaijan brokered by the United States. The United States now has a 99-year lease on this strategic trade corridor. It's actually a pretty big deal. The United States has had very little influence, to almost none, in the South Caucasus region until this agreement came into being. And so it offers a lot of promise. And so we can see here 3 scenarios: regional development and stability sustained. So that would be really significant. And it really takes into account how all of the actors are going to behave. Will Iran try to destabilize this agreement? Will Russia try to destabilize this agreement? These are all critical factors, and they could really destabilize, and it could cause us to not have the ideal outcome. But the ideal outcome is everything happens, Armenia benefits economically, Azerbaijan benefits, the United States benefits, and then there's other scenarios where there are more limited outcomes. And then finally, we can talk about the impact of geopolitical events on financial market stability and widening credit spreads. So here we're talking about the implementation of tariffs and trade disputes, escalating regional conflicts, geopolitical fragmentation, rising financial instability and credit market stress, investor risk aversion increasing, perceived default risk rises for corporations, and so on. And so you have 3 different scenarios. If all of these events occur, okay, so the tariffs, the trade disputes, the regional conflicts escalate, the geopolitical fragmentation continues, and this impacts the stability of markets and investor risk aversion increases, you have this perfect storm where you're going to see this widening credit spread between corporate bonds and treasuries, and between specifically the higher quality corporate bonds as well as the high yield bonds. So that is the worst case scenario, okay? And all of those factors are dynamic, from the probability of it to what the spreads will be. And they're dynamic and they move on a daily basis. The second scenario is it's a more limited impact. Continued trade war disputes widen credit spreads. And in that case, the impact is less, or regional conflicts widen credit spreads. And again, that impact is even less. So these are the types of scenarios that we're constantly monitoring. We're monitoring all of these different variables in the world. And everything we produce is before the event occurs. So before the event occurs, we're generating these probabilities, the likelihood that these are the precursors to an event. And this allows for risk mitigation. So it allows essentially to avoid, circumvent, bypass certain conditions and events, or it allows you to take advantage of certain opportunities in the market. It changes the game. I will say this, in addition to augmenting human beings, our system can augment as well LLMs, because we can feed it more accurate observation-based data. We can be its connection to the physical world.
Please join me in thanking Don Leka.